Hello, I am Kathleen Blessing, Manager of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Fuel Division. The Alcohol, Tobacco, and Fuel Division processes several larger excise taxes for the Illinois Department of Revenue. Our primary focus is processing tax returns for alcohol, tobacco, cannabis cultivators, motor fuel use tax, and motor fuel tax. I will briefly share some of the common errors of each of these tax types. Next slide. The returns for wholesale distributors and manufacturers of alcohol tobacco products have support schedules that show sales and receipts of products. To avoid common errors, remember that Illinois is an invoice state. Federal ID numbers need to be correctly identified. Invoice numbers and amounts of shipments or purchases must be the exact amount of the product according to the invoice. This applies to liquor gallons and rates on the various RL-26 forms and schedules, tobacco product ounces on the TP1, and cigarette number of sticks on the various RC6 forms. For cannabis cultivator tax filers, remember that accelerated payments for every filing period need to be scheduled and paid by the due dates of the 7th, 15th, 22nd, and the last day of every month. Late submissions may negatively impact the discount on the MC1 or the CC1 return. Next slide, please. Moving on to motor fuel use tax, quarterly returns filed by carriers licensed under the IFTA agreement, there's several common errors. Quarterly returns are expected whether a carrier has activity in the quarter or not. Filing a no operations return is as simple as checking the no operations box in step 1 and submitting it. Canceling a license is also done in step 1. After checking the cancel fuel license box, you must enter the date that falls within the reporting quarter. Mile per gallon errors are common. If the MPG is not reasonable for the qualified motor vehicle, check the number of gallons used to calculate the MPG. Make sure it includes fuel put into the supply tank that operates the vehicles. Do not include reefer fuel, diesel exhaust fuel, or fuel delivered to a bulk tank. If a receipt is lost, the fuel still must be accounted for when calculating the MPG. Be aware of your fleet trends. Mile per gallon figures fluctuate slightly from quarter to quarter. However, large swings between quarters can indicate reporting issues. Estimating miles. IFTA reporting requires good record keeping, and the reporting and actual amounts rounded to the nearest whole mile and whole gallon, not estimates. Total miles and taxable miles. They're usually the same. Illinois and most jurisdictions do not exempt miles. A complete list of jurisdiction exemptions is maintained at the IFTA Clearinghouse website. IFTA, and that website is iftach.org. That's iftach.org. The iftach.org website also contains special reporting instructions for jurisdictions' tax holidays. Report Illinois activity also. So that's a common error. Total fleet activity must be reported on the IFTA return. Don't leave out Illinois activity. Next slide. Many common errors also occur with gallonage reporting. When you report mileage activity on a jurisdictions line, the taxable gallons are auto-calculated to determine how much fuel your fleet used while driving through that jurisdiction. The tax-paid gallons field is where you enter the total fuel purchased in that jurisdiction for your fleet. It is possible to drive through a jurisdiction and not purchase fuel. It's also probable that your fleet will buy more fuel in a jurisdiction and that they may use, and they might buy less fuel in a jurisdiction than they use. The results on the return will show some jurisdictions are owed money and some jurisdictions owe you money. The net total on the return is the tax you pay or get a refund for. Excessive tax-paid gallons. This means the grand total of your tax-paid gallons excessively exceeds the gallons used to calculate the MPG, then an error has probably occurred. Check to see if reefer fuel, bulk deliveries, or diesel exhaust fuel receipts were included as tax-paid gallons in error. Also, we noticed that some people have reported dollar amounts instead of gallon amounts in error. The key is to take credit for actual gallons purchased in the jurisdiction they were purchased, no more, no less. Payment errors. Most payment errors can be remedied if one proceeds to payment after submitting the return to avoid late payment penalties. Please be aware that payments can take up to 5 business days to post, so allow the payment time to post. Do not just send another payment when you don't see it. Next slide. Now let's move on from interstate carriers to licensed motor fuel distributors, suppliers, and receivers who file monthly returns that are due the 20th of each month. Some of the common errors these companies have involve inventory issues. Illinois requires a stick meter reading for fuel inventory. Using book or stick or a meter reading for inventory. Using book inventories can lead to big problems. Also imperative is making sure ending inventory matches the beginning inventory the next month, and that the combined fuel inventories on the RMFT-5 must agree with column 1 inventory amount on the RMFT-5 US receiver's return. Issues with loss gain seem to be common. The loss gain line 10 on the RMFT-5 is to show differences due to temperature variations or evaporation. It is not to be used for missing fuel receipts or sales. Next slide, please. Another common area that fuel distributors and suppliers have is not reporting the fuel gallons they use for operating vehicles. Their use of fuel to operate vehicles on public highways and waterways is taxable and needs to be reported. As mentioned earlier and also applies to motor fuel reporting, Illinois is an invoice state. Purchases and sales must report correct invoice numbers and amounts. Diesel issues. Diesel is created for non-highway use only. It can only be sold by distributors and suppliers, not brokers or unlicensed resellers. Distributors and suppliers must report their own use of diesel on line 8, column 3 of the RMFT-5. Distributors and suppliers must report the purchaser, the legal address, and the non-highway use code on each sale of diesel. The department has stiff penalties for diesel violations.